NC State has a motto: think and do. Aristotle said, we are what we habitually do. I'm here to ask the question, what if what we think we're doing is not what we're doing at all? What do we become? I am a teaching assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Education and Learning Sciences in the Elementary Education Department. So I'm going to ask these questions about thinking and doing as they relate to education and how we value our youngest students. I'm also going to ask us to think about the achievement gap in ways that perhaps we haven't thought of it before. So the achievement gap, so it goes, is this idea that if we organize kids by demographic background, socioeconomic status or race, or gender, and then plot their academic performance, then we can find a discernible gap. So here's one here. So there's the achievement gap. There's academic tests of some sort and the years, and we can see that over time there's this gap. Here's another one, same idea. But next, once we have this data and this paradigm put up here, we tend to ask this question. Well, what should we do with these low performers? I guess we need to give them more support based on their academic needs and their weaker abilities. And this is what I'm going to ask you to reconsider. All right, first, two themes. Something you already know. Large high schools beat small high schools in sports virtually every time. Why? More school spirit? Just innately talented, more talented kids? No, one reason alone: more kids. Another theme I want you to keep in mind is that diversity beats ability. Now, this one you may not have thought about, but the author, Scott Page, in his book, The Difference, describes experiments he did where he looked at top problem solvers, and then he tried to organize what are the best problem-solving teams. And so he would put the top problem solvers together and compare their production with problem-solving groups that were randomly organized and included some weaker problem solvers. And what he found was surprising. The more diverse group that included weaker problem solvers beat the top group virtually every time, particularly when they were difficult problems. So keep those two things in mind. Large beats small, diversity beats ability. Wow. All right, next, we're going to get started. We're going to start in a hospital emergency room. So this is outlined in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. And there's a story about a Chicago hospital where the hospital administrator was was underfunded, and he was tasked with improving the rate at which doctors identified which patients in the emergency room needed to be admitted because they were about to have a heart attack and which could be sent home. The current protocol was for doctors to use their professional judgment, to take vital signs that they saw fit, to take a social history, and to do whatever physical exam they felt was needed. And then the doctors would make the call. What this hospital administrator, Brendan Riley, wanted to do was to use a different protocol. It's called the Goldman formula, and it uses 4 vital signs only: your ECG, your systolic blood pressure, presence of fluid in the lungs, and the presence of an unstable angina, which is pain. After a while, they were able to do both protocols for a while and then compare. And the results were clear. The Goldman formula, with just the 4 vital signs, outperformed the doctors in their professional judgment. So why might this happen? Well, let's think about the assumptions doctors might be making about their patients. They might be looking at things that have to do with long-term health and not whether or not somebody's about to have an imminent heart attack. For instance, whether they have their family history of hypertension, whether their father had a heart attack, whether they're black or white or a man or a woman, whether they're obese. All these things are probably interfering with the doctor's ability to actually make the call on who's about to have a heart attack. But doctors are not alone. Many of us are familiar with the Moneyball, this idea that professional baseball scouts tend to overvalue players who look the part and undervalue players who don't. So what they found was that when they actually looked at some of these undervalued players and created a more diverse team, teams could beat higher payroll teams with these more diverse groups. But the key here is that the scouts were actually their thoughts about the players and what they looked like and what the reputation was were actually interfering with their ability to find which players could best help their team. That brings us to point number 1. We are surprisingly bad at evaluating what other people can and will do, even when we have a vested interest in getting it right. And our assumptions appear to be a culprit. All right, let's move to hockey. You may or may not know about this, but it's been well documented that hockey players are disproportionately born in January, February, and March. Now that's weird, right? Why would that be so? Well, Diener, Lowen, and Cobley organized this information this way. They used the demographic of which month the hockey players were born in, and then they looked at who was drafted into the NHL over the past 30 years, or from 78 to 2008. The yellow triangles are players born in the first quarter of the year. The blue circles are players born in the last quarter of the year. Make sure you understand this graph. Let's take a look at 1 year. So here's 1998. And you can see in 1998, 32% of the players drafted into the NHL were born in January, February, March. 12% of the players drafted in the NHL were born in October, November, and December. Again, this is strange. Why would this happen? Well, many of you who played sports or whose kids played sports may already be familiar with this phenomenon. And Malcolm Gladwell reports on this in his book Outliers. And it goes something like this. In hockey playing communities, young kids, very young kids, are already playing hockey, 5, 6, 7 years old. And what happens in these recreation leagues is that the coaches of these young kids are tasked with trying to evaluate and find the most talented players to put on an elite team. So the coaches do their best, they evaluate the players, they create an elite team. But what seems to be happening is that age is a proxy for talent. So think about young players, okay? If I'm six years old, 11 months, I'm significantly older than somebody who was born at a different time and is only 6 years old 1 month. So without realizing it, coaches are probably disproportionately identifying their older players and not their most talented players. Well, what happens next? Well, these identified players are called the most talented players. They're put on elite playing teams because we perceive that that's what they need. We don't want to hold them back by these weaker players. And they get more repetitions and a different experience. They have a different opportunity than the other players who've been cut. So that brings us to point number 2. Think about all those players born in October, November, and December who were just a little smaller at that time, who had a lot of talent, had a lot of passion, but they were cut and had a different experience. When we cut people, we don't gain, we lose resources. Let's look at this again. Here's the hockey league organized by the demographic of what a month they're born in, and when we look at this, we say, this doesn't make sense, okay? I submit that when we look at this graphic, we should feel the same way. This doesn't make sense. Just as there's no reason that somebody born in October or November is inherently less good at hockey, there's no reason that somebody of a lower socioeconomic status or somebody who's black or Hispanic is inherently less capable in academics. This doesn't make sense. And our way we talk about it as if it's the kids who are the problem, these low-achieving kids, is really problematic. We need to start realizing that this is an opportunity gap, not, I don't even want to say it, an achievement gap. I don't even like the term, okay? It's a gap of opportunity. And research can back this up. So here's one of many recent studies, and this one found that 40% of that the opportunity to learn accounted for up to 40% of the difference in the math gap, difference in math achievement between wealthy students and poor students. Then, what this researcher also points out is that it's not just that maybe some kids come to school a little bit in a different place than other kids. It's that the experiences that we then provide them actually increase the gap. This is something I want us to think about. Now, we study these things at the school level because that's where the kids are. But I want to make sure it's clear is that this is not a school issue. This is a cultural issue. This is a community issue. Remember, it's parents who put pressure on schools to make sure that their kids get identified and put into elite, exclusive clubs at the age of 6 and 7 years old and have an elevated status. And once we do that, if we say that some students have an elevated status at 6 or 7 or 8 years old, we're essentially cutting other kids. So what should we do about this? Well, let me tell you about my dad. My father, who died a few years ago, addressed this issue in the 1950s. He was a football coach at Lehighton, Pennsylvania, and among other things, he told me he never cut a player. My brother and I were looking through articles. We found that there were some surprisingly recent articles discussing my father's contributions. What my dad said and what my dad did when he came to Lehighton was he didn't just coach a football team, he changed the culture of the town. So the other cities or small towns were organized the way the hockey was organized. Seems obvious enough. You take your best players, put them in an elite team, train those kids up, and that'll make you the best possible football team. My dad said, nope, we're not doing that in Lehighton. What we're doing in Lehighton is we're not even going to have a traveling team. We're not going to play other cities. What we're going to do is we're going to have 4 teams, and we're just going to play each other. Nobody gets cut. And it appears that he really has had an impact. The regulations and the mandates that he put in place are still in place. He said, not only are the teams going to play each other, I'm going to make sure that all kids get playing time. So in this more recent article, you can see that those mandatory playing times are still in place. Little kids have to play at least a quarter of a game. Bigger little kids have to play at least a half of a game. And there's some evidence that this town now, instead of being proud of their most amazing elite team, they're proud of the fact that in Lehighton, all kids get to play football. Now, my dad used to say this too. I don't want a football coach of a 6 or 7 year old to decide who my quarterback is going to be in high school. And that's exactly what happens when we create these elite teams. It becomes even a community issue. One time he wanted to have a different quarterback than who the community thought was the quarterback for the school at another town we lived in. And it was, there was an uproar. When we have these elite teams, certain kids see themselves as the best. Everybody else sees them as the best. And it takes away healthy competition. What he said is he wants as many kids as possible to get repetitions at quarterback and all the other positions so that as many kids as possible get the opportunity to learn to play football and to see themselves as football players. And that's what makes the team at the high school level the strongest. All kids play together. So what's so cool about my dad's thing is that he takes advantage of our 2 themes, a larger pool and a more diverse pool, all in one. Whereas the other teams make themselves less diverse by cutting a bunch of players, and they also make their pool size smaller. Now, unfortunately, we tend to organize, a healthy society would organize themselves, or in school, where all kids play together so that we could have diverse ideas, opinions, perspectives, diverse learners playing with each other and learning from each other. Unfortunately, we don't do that. By the time kids are 7 years old, we've already identified whether they're quote-unquote gifted and talented. I joke that's insane, right? It takes you 10 years to actually get good at something. So how could you possibly be gifted or talented when you're only 7 years old? The other thing that's interesting about this is that parents and communities pressure schools to organize themselves this way because they think this is the right thing to do, right? It seems obvious that the best thing to do is to give these talented kids more repetitions. But is it? whenever we elevate some kids to a higher status, we're cutting other kids. We're also, it's not even best for those kids who get elevated because they are told that they're better than other kids, which certainly isn't good. And they also miss out on the diversity of perspectives that they would get if they were in this larger, more diverse classroom. A lot of countries organize themselves this way and don't start tracking and grouping kids till almost high school. There's also brave communities in the United States who are starting to realize, hey, we think we're doing the right thing, but are we? We actually create a healthier, more rigorous, stronger academic community when we don't spend our time making assumptions about kids and trying to decide who the talented kids are when they're only 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. It doesn't make sense. So I say, let's do the right thing. Let's become who we want to become. And there's another motto at NC State that says this even better than I could. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Thank you.